Dragon is in countdown. Falcon 9 is in startup. Dragon, SpaceX, go for launch.
You are looking live at Launch Complex 39A at Kennedy Space Center. In just over 20 minutes, this Falcon 9 rocket will lift off, carrying the 28th commercial resupply services mission from both NASA and SpaceX to the International Space Station. Good morning and welcome to live coverage of the CRS-28 launch. I'm NASA's Jasmine Hopkins. Fueling of the Falcon 9 began about 15 minutes ago, and we're counting down to an instantaneous launch at 11:47 a.m. Eastern Time. This mission will deliver about 7,000 pounds of science, supplies, and equipment to the space station. And these missions help NASA and our partners continue research to better our life right here on Earth and help us as we explore deep space. Let's go now to SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, where Zachary Lupin is standing by to tell us more about the vehicle supporting today's mission. Zach?
Thanks, Jasmine. Hello, everyone. My name is Zachary Lupin, and I'm an avionics reliability engineer here at SpaceX. And it's great to be covering today's mission in partnership with NASA. On your screen right now is a live view of SpaceX's two-stage Falcon 9 rocket with our Dragon spacecraft at the very top. Dragon is one of the few vehicles that can deliver significant cargo to the space station and the only vehicle that can deliver cargo from it. And to date, Dragon has visited the station 37 times and transported 280,000 pounds of cargo back and forth from the orbiting laboratory. Below Dragon is our Falcon 9 vehicle, which is actually two rockets in one. The lower part, also the largest part of the rocket, is called the first stage. It has 9 Merlin 1D engines, which accelerate the vehicle through the Earth's atmosphere and into various orbits in space. At the top of the first stage is the black inner stage, and above that is the Falcon 9 second stage. Now, the two stages will separate about 2.5 minutes into flight, and then the second stage will ignite its single Merlin vacuum engine, or MVAC engine, which is the 10th engine on the rocket, to carry Dragon to its desired orbit. Now, during today's mission, you will notice a shorter nozzle attached to our second stage. We are flying a shorter nozzle when we don't need as much performance to get payloads to their final destination. Now, for those of you following along, today marks SpaceX's 38th launch this year, 4th Dragon flight in 2023, and 237th mission overall. Now, Falcon 9 and Dragon were both designed with reflight in mind, and the vehicle hardware is built to support multiple missions with minimal refurbishment. Today's Dragon is flying for its 4th time and also marks SpaceX's 20th reuse of the vehicle. And the Falcon 9 first stage is flying for its 5th time, and we plan to recover and fly both the vehicle and the spacecraft again in the future. So far, we've reflown 170 first stages, including both Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy, and we're planning to recover this booster on our drone ship, a Shortfall of Gravitas, which is currently stationed off the coast of Florida in the Atlantic Ocean. And if successful, this will mark the 198th recovery of an orbital-class rocket. Now, as the clock ticks closer to T0, let's head over to NASA's Megan Cruz at Cape Canaveral to talk about today's weather. Megan?
Thank you, Zach, and good morning, everyone. Welcome into Hangar AE at nearby Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. This is where I can monitor the launch team as they take us through today's countdown. So far, hearing a lot of good things over the nets. The vehicle is healthy, the team working no issues, the range is green, meaning our path from here to the International Space Station is clear and safe, and the weather, which has been the issue all weekend, forcing the team to stand down Saturday and Sunday attempts. Today, we are 80% go. You can see those watch items on the bottom left of your screen. Launch Weather Officer Arlena Moses will be monitoring a few showers she expects to move into the area during launch. And I know some of you out there, you might be thinking it seems a little windy out here, but those winds are well below any concerns for launch. And as for the weather around the booster recovery area yesterday, high seas kept us from launching, but today, check out this live look from SpaceX's drone ship out in the Atlantic. Conditions are still a little rough out there, but better than yesterday, hence again that 80% go for launch in just about 17 minutes. So right now, SpaceX is fueling Falcon 9 RP-1, or rocket-grade kerosene load, is complete. Super-chilled liquid oxygen is being loaded into the first and second stage. You see those white clouds, completely normal. That's some of the liquid oxygen venting off. SpaceX vents off some of that LOX to maintain the right pressure in the tanks. And those clouds form when the liquid oxygen makes contact with Florida's humid air. Our instantaneous launch opportunity today, 11:47 and 0 seconds Eastern Time, if we want to dock with the International Space Station on Tuesday, June 6th. For more on that, let's head over to Shaniqua Vereen inside NASA's Mission Control Center.
Thanks, Megan, and welcome to the International Space Station Flight Control Room. I am Shaniqua Vereen, live at the Johnson Space Center here in Houston, Texas. The team of flight controllers at Mission Control Houston today is being led by Flight Director Scott Stover. Teams here in Mission Control will really jump into action tomorrow night into early Tuesday morning as Cargo Dragon approaches the International Space Station. There are currently 7 crew members living and working aboard the station. Expedition 69 consists of NASA astronaut Frank Rubio, Dmitry Petelin of Roscosmos, Sultan Anayati from the United Arab Emirates, Woody Hoberg and Stephen Bowen of NASA, Andrei Fedyaev, and Commander Sergei Prokopyev of Roscosmos. As Cargo Dragon approaches the International Space Station in the morning hours of June 6, NASA astronauts Frank Rubio and Woody Hoberg will be monitoring the arrival from the station's cupola. Cargo Dragon will remain attached to the International Space Station, its zenith port of the Harmony module, for about 1 month, being one of 2 Dragons joining Crew Dragon Endeavour before being packed up with critical science and supplies that will splash down off the coast of Florida for that science to be analyzed back here on Earth. Everything is still a go from the Mission Control Center here in Houston, and we're looking forward to welcoming another Dragon to the International Space Station. So for now, we'll head back out to Kennedy. Jasmine?
Thank you, Shaniqua. Now we are about T-minus 14 minutes and counting from liftoff of CRS-28, so let's talk about the science. New experiments will soon arrive on the space station. Thunderstorm observation equipment could improve research on Earth's climate and weather. And astronauts will be growing a second generation of plant seeds in space to see if gene changes transfer to future generations. And those are just some of the experiments joining the hundreds of ongoing investigations already aboard the orbiting lab. This mission will also increase power supply on the station, delivering the 3rd set of roll-out solar arrays, also known as IROSAs. After being installed on upcoming spacewalks, the arrays will roll out into position, boosting power on the station by up to 30%. Now, across the country, NASA and our partners are making small steps and giant leaps in preparation for the Artemis II crewed mission around the moon. So let's take a look at our Artemis Moon Minute. All 5 major structures of the Space Launch System rocket's core stage have now been fully integrated at the Michoud Assembly Facility in Louisiana. The engine section is the most complex and intricate part of the core stage that powers the Artemis missions to the moon. RS-25 engine testing is underway at Stennis Space Center near Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. This test is part of a 12-test series that will certify the new design for crewed Artemis missions. The engine ran for its full planned 720 seconds, the longest duration to date. At Kennedy Space Center in Florida, technicians have been testing the solar array wings for the Artemis II service module. Orion will have 4 solar wings, drawing in 11 kilowatts of power from the sun. Some of the avionics for Artemis II have already been to space. Technicians finished cleaning and removing avionics on the Artemis I crew module, which will be used on the Orion capsule for Artemis II in 2024. Now we are at T-minus 12 minutes and counting from the liftoff of the 28th Commercial Resupply Services mission from both NASA and SpaceX to the International Space Station. So let's bring back Zach now to tell us more about Dragon's flight history. Zach?
Thanks, Jasmine. For those of you following along, you'll know that it's already been a very busy year and couple of weeks for Dragon vehicles at the International Space Station. CRS-28 marks SpaceX's 4th Dragon mission of 2023, following the launches of Crew 6, CRS-27, and AX-2. The Dragon spacecraft supporting today's mission will be joining Crew 6 and Dragon Endeavour, which have been on station since March. Now, in order to make room for AX-2 and CRS-28 at the Harmony Zenith port on the ISS, the 4 members of Crew 6 underwent a port relocation on May 6th. And put another way, Dragon moved parking spots to make room for the incoming Dragons. A few weeks later, on Sunday, May 21st, Dragon and the crew of AX-2 lifted off from historic Launch Complex 39A at NASA's Kennedy Space Center and arrived at station about 15.5 hours later. And this is Dragon's fastest launch to docking time for a human spaceflight mission. After 8 days of living and conducting research on the space station, Dragon Freedom undocked from the orbiting laboratory and returned the AX-2 crew back to planet Earth off the coast of Florida at 11:04 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, May 30th. And this made room for the Dragon vehicle supporting today's mission. From the beginning, Dragon was designed to fly cargo and humans to and from space. And since Dragon's first visit to the space station in May 2012, we've come a long way. In that time, as I mentioned earlier, Dragon has visited the ISS 37 times, and 9 of those missions carried crew. In fact, the first time Dragon flew people was just about 3 years ago with SpaceX and NASA's Demo 2 mission to the space station. NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley took the first flight on Dragon on May 30th, 2020, returning human spaceflight capabilities to the United States for the first time since the space shuttle retired in 2011. The launch of Demo 2 also marked the first time in history that a commercial company successfully took astronauts to orbit. And since then, SpaceX has launched a total of 10 human spaceflight missions to space. And to help enable greater flexibility for future Dragon missions, SpaceX is preparing our neighboring pad, Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida, to support both cargo and crew missions. As we fly more and more people to and from space, human spaceflight becomes more accessible and creates more opportunities for humanity to become a spacefaring civilization. And now I'll turn it back to Jasmine at KSC to take a look at one of the payloads flying on today's mission. Jasmine?
Thank you, Zach. One experiment on CRS-28 could be used to predict your risk for certain diseases, aging, and how our bodies heal. Earlier this week, I got the chance to speak with the brains behind Genes in Space 10. Joining us now is Christine Anwaha, a high school student from East Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Welcome, Christine.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, happy to have you here. So can you tell us a little bit about how you're feeling a high school student with your experiment heading to the International Space Station?
It's honestly a dream come true. This idea started off originally in my head, and now it's going to be a reality pretty soon, so I'm really excited.
Of course, we love that excitement, Christine, and we cannot wait to see your dreams realized. Can you break down what is the Genes in Space 10 experiment?
The experiment involved telomeres, and these are the repetitive sequences that cap the ends of our chromosomes. On Earth, telomeres normally shorten as we age, but for astronauts in space, they actually appear to get longer. And so with that, I developed an experiment to see if that process could be linked to the activity of stem cells. Now, in the development of that experiment, something really important was measuring telomere length. But it turns out that isn't something that can really be done on the ISS. Instead, experiments involving DNA length measurement need to be sent down to Earth, and that costs time and resources. So with that, the Genes in Space team and I got thinking, what if we developed an experiment that could help address that? And so we developed an experiment that will allow astronauts on the ISS to detect a 4-fold difference in DNA length. And so with that, it opens the door up for more kinds of research to be done on the ISS, such as into genetic monitoring, because being in space makes you more prone to genetic mutations. So that's something that can help with that. Also opens the door up for more research into telomeres to be done, and even broader.
Christine, that is so exciting. And your experiment was chosen out of over 600 applications. So what advice do you have for students who are also interested in this opportunity?
Yeah, I would just encourage other students to just explore their passions in space biology and pursue it as best as you can. That's what I did, and it led me to where I am here.
Exactly. Very excited to have you here. And tell me, what are your plans after high school? I mean, you've got some great things on the horizon, right?
Yeah, so in the fall, I'll be headed off to UNC Chapel Hill. I'm planning on studying either biology or biochemistry, and I'm really excited to get more involved with biological research in the future, especially space biology.
Of course. Thank you so much for joining us today, Christine.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Christine for speaking with us. And she is not the only student experiment going up on CRS-28. STEM engagement is very important to us here at NASA for the future of the Artemis generation. All right, now we are just about 7 minutes and counting until liftoff of CRS-28. So let's bring back Megan here on Florida's Space Coast and Zach live at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, to walk us through the final moments of the countdown. Take it away.
Thanks, Jasmine. It's T-minus 6 minutes and 50 seconds, and the SpaceX team is currently working no significant issues, and the vehicle is healthy. Weather is currently 80% go, and the range is ready to support today's mission. At this point, Rocket Propellant 1, or RP-1 fuel, is completely loaded on the second stage and nearly complete on the first stage. Liquid oxygen, or LOX loading, is currently underway on both stages and will complete at the T-minus 2 minutes mark to launch. We're also loading helium gas into both stages. Falcon 9 uses helium as a pressurant to backfill the propellant tanks as LOX and RP-1 are consumed by the Merlin engines during ascent. Helium load began before the broadcast went live and will continue to top off until about a minute and a half before launch.
And about 40 seconds ago, SpaceX performed the engine chill. That's when the team flowed a small amount of the super chilled liquid oxygen into the Merlin engine's turbopumps. They're basically prepping the propulsion system for the full flow of liquid oxygen. By doing this, they avoid a thermal shock to the system, ensuring engine startup
Stage 1
goes
fuel
well.
load is complete.
And you heard that call out for Stage 1 fuel load complete. Now, Dragon also began its startup sequence at T-minus 35 minutes when it coordinated timing with Falcon 9. The spacecraft is currently undergoing vehicle health checks. It will enter terminal count at T-minus 5 minutes, with the next big step just a minute before liftoff, when Dragon will transition to internal power.
Now, you may have noticed those white clouds around the vehicle. Those are completely normal. They are chilled gas above the LOX tank liquid surface that we vent overboard to maintain pressure in the tank as needed. And when that gas comes out into contact with the warm, humid Florida air, the air condenses into clouds and water. Now,
You're at the eye, Bob.
for now, we should see the
Count. Falcon 9 tanks are pressurizing for strongback
the
retract.
transporter erector. The
Dragon is internal count and
transporter erector,
internal
or
power.
The transporter erector, or TE, is used for vehicle rollout and to route propellants and electrical power to the vehicle in preparation for launch. And once those clamp arms have fully opened, the TE will then retract away from the rocket in preparation for liftoff.
We have a hot mic on the countdown net. All parties check your key panels.
Strongback lower has started.
We should see those clamp arms opening in about 15 seconds from now. Now, those clamp arms are located just below the trunk of the vehicle, which is beneath the Dragon spacecraft. And there you can see those clamp arms beginning to open around the booster. Now, in these last few minutes before T0, Falcon 9 is performing final health checks on its primary communications, avionics, and propulsion systems in preparation for flight. And we may hear callouts that engines are sufficiently chilled as we get a little closer to liftoff. Those clamp arms should be fully open, and the transporter erector, that strong back, is going to recline away from the rocket. Now, you may have noticed in some of these shots, the Falcon 9 booster supporting today's mission is covered in quite a bit of soot, and that is because it previously supported NASA Crew 5, GPS-3, Space Vehicle 6, Inmarsat 6 F2, and 1 Starlink mission. And you can see that strong back slowly reclining away from the vehicle.
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
This launch will bring about 7,000 pounds of hardware, crew supplies, and science to the space station. One research project will study the effects of space on human DNA. Another will study the effects on plant DNA. Findings from both could help us advance things here on Earth, but also prepare us for future, farther missions into space. And Dragon will be docked to the space station for about a month before returning home. Now, checkouts of the second stage thrust vector control actuators are now underway. This is often referred to as an engine wiggle test. This is when SpaceX moves the thrust nozzles slightly to make sure the guidance hardware is ready for flight. SpaceX will do the exact same test on the first stage engines, but that happens just seconds before ignition.
Now, Dragon is also performing its final health checks to make sure all of the vehicle's primary systems are ready
Stage
for its
2 lock
rendezvous
load is
with the
complete.
International Space Station.
Dragon is
And
an
there's that
auto
call out
idle.
that stage 2 LOX loading is complete. That wraps up propellant loading for both stages of the Falcon 9. And as I mentioned earlier, you may have seen those white clouds around the vehicle.
Ground gas
Those
closeout.
clouds you see are the chilled gas above the LOX tank liquid surface that we vent overboard. And when that gas comes out in contact with the warm Florida air, the air condenses into clouds and water.
Now Dragon is about to transition into internal power. Also Falcon 9 computers will then enter startup mode, which is when the Falcon 9 flight computers take control of the countdown, guiding the rocket through the last seconds before liftoff. You should hear a call out about startup shortly.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
Dragon is in countdown.
Both stages are now pressurizing for launch. At T-minus 45 seconds, we'll hear the SpaceX launch director verify go for launch.
Go for launch.
There you go. And at launch, the International Space Station will be flying 260 miles over the North Atlantic, south of St. John's, Newfoundland.
T-minus 30 seconds. Seconds. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition, engines full power, and liftoff of CRS-28. Go Falcon, go Dragon.
Liftoff of about 7,000 pounds of science and cargo, including a new pair of solar arrays to boost power on the space station.
Plus 40 seconds, Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from historic Launch Complex 39A in Florida. And we're now coming up on max Q in about 20 seconds from now. And this is the point of maximum aerodynamic pressure that the vehicle will go through during its flight.
Falcon 9 is supersonic.
And there's that call out that Falcon 9 is supersonic, traveling faster than the speed of sound.
Max Q.
And there you heard the call out for max Q. Coming up next are 3 events back to back, the first of which is main engine cutoff, or MECO, and this is when all 9 Merlin 1D engines on the first stage shut down. After those 9 engines shut down, the first and second stages will separate, and this is also called out over the nets as stage separation. From there, the second stage will ignite its Merlin vacuum engine to boost Dragon to low Earth orbit during SES, or second engine start one. And this whole sequence takes about 15 seconds. Should be expecting that call out for main engine cutoff in about 40 seconds from now. Some amazing views of our Falcon 9 vehicle as it takes our Dragon spacecraft to orbit. And in just about 10 seconds, we should see that main engine cut off.
MECO. Stage separation. In vac ignition.
And there you heard those callouts and probably saw on your screen, main engine cutoff, followed by stage separation, and then second engine start 1. As I mentioned earlier, we're flying an MVAC nozzle, a shortened MVAC nozzle on our second stage. If you're just tuning in, you're watching a live webcast for the 28th commercial resupply mission to the International Space Station for NASA. This is SpaceX's 38th mission for 2023 and the 4th Dragon flight to the International Space Station this year. We lifted off from Kennedy Space Center's historic Launch Complex 39A just about 3.5 minutes ago. Now on your screen, on the left side, you can see our Falcon 9 first stage, which is going to descend back towards Earth, and the second stage on the right side of your screen, which is carrying the Dragon spacecraft. Now, as a reminder, today's mission marks the 5th flight for this Falcon 9 booster, which previously supported the Crew 5, GPS 3 Space Vehicle 6, Inmarsat 6F2, and 1 Starlink mission. In order to make its way back to our drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas, the Falcon 9 first stage has 2 more burns to execute. The first is the entry burn, where 3 of the Merlin engines will reignite. This helps slow the stage down as it re-enters the upper part of the Earth's atmosphere. The entry burn is followed by the landing burn, and this is a single engine burn that brings the vehicle's speed down rapidly in order to land on the drone ship. Now, occasionally with the Falcon 9 first stage on the left side of your screen, you may see some small white puffs, and those are nitrogen gas bursts that are used for attitude control. You can also see there on your screen a pair of the hypersonic grid fins. Falcon 9 is equipped with 4 of these grid fins, which are comprised of titanium, and they are positioned near the top of the first stage. Once in the atmosphere, stage 1 is only using the grid fins for steering as it makes its return to Earth. And these grid fins orient the rocket during re-entry and guide the rocket during its descent. Now, the Falcon 9 first stage has 9 Merlin 1D engines, and each engine generates about 192,000 pounds of thrust. On the second stage is the MVAC engine, which has a slightly wider nozzle, and the vacuum engine generates about 203,000 pounds of thrust. Next major milestone is going to be the first stage entry burn, which will take place just over a minute from now. There you can see an amazing view of our stage 2 with its shortened MVAC nozzle. The Falcon 9 first stage, which is not currently on your screen, has reached apogee and is now beginning its descent back towards Earth. The second stage is continuing to take our Dragon spacecraft to orbit. And we should see that first stage entry burn begin about 15 seconds from now on the left side of your screen.
Stage 1, STS has safed.
Stage 1 entry
The
burn
second
startup.
stage on the right side of your screen. And there's that call out for stage 1 entry burn startup on the left side of your screen. The second stage is continuing to take our Dragon spacecraft to orbit. Now again, the entry burn is the first of 2 burns that the Falcon 9 booster performs before landing on our drone ship.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
And there's that confirmation of stage 1 entry burn shutdown. As we get closer to first stage landing, it's good to note that the Falcon 9 first stage is equipped with 4 landing legs made of state-of-the-art carbon fiber with aluminum honeycomb. These landing legs are placed symmetrically around the base of the rocket and deployed just prior to landing. And if successful, this landing will mark the 198th time that we've recovered a first stage booster, including both Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy missions. We are about 25 seconds away from that landing burn beginning.
Stage 1 transonic.
Now, as the rocket descends through the Earth's atmosphere, this really puts deceleration into perspective. In the span of less than a minute, we'll have reduced from twice the speed of a jet all the way down to 0 as the rocket lands. And as Falcon lands, we may also hear a call out that the second engine will shut off around the same time.
Stage 1 landing burn. Landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
And there you have it. The Falcon 9 first stage that supported today's mission has landed for its 5th time, having previously supported Crew 5, GPS 3, Space Vehicle 6, Inmarsat 6F2, and a Starlink mission. Today's landing also marks the 198th successful landing for an orbital class rocket. You may have also heard confirmation of good orbit.
Acquisition of signal, Newfoundland.
At T plus 9 minutes and 30 seconds into the mission, we are coming up on the last major task for Stage 2, commanding separation of Dragon a couple minutes from now. And we expect to have video of Dragon separation from the top of the second stage, which looks into the trunk. CRS-28 will be joining the Crew 6 vehicle, currently on orbit, so we'll be back to having two Dragon spacecraft docked at the International Space Station. As for cargo, today we will be delivering more than 7,000 pounds of science, research, crew supplies, and vehicle hardware to the orbital laboratory and its crew. To date, SpaceX has sent and brought back over 280,000 pounds of crew and cargo to and from the space station. And we should be seeing Dragon separation about a minute and a half from now. As a reminder, this is the 4th flight for this Dragon capsule, having previously supported CRS-21, CRS-23, and CRS-25 to the space station. Today's flight also marks the 20th reuse of a Dragon vehicle overall. Now, Dragon has 16 Draco thrusters on board, each with the capability to deliver 90 pounds of force. There are 4 pairs of 3 thrusters spaced evenly around the capsule, as well as 4 forward bulkhead thrusters underneath the nose cone. Now, notably, today's Dragon does not have super Draco thrusters, seats, or life support systems, as it's not carrying crew. And this saves on weight and space, and also allows for a faster refurbishment time. While initial designs of Dragon carried solar arrays extended outward from the trunk, the cylindrical structure located directly behind the Dragon capsule, the current Dragon has these arrays fixed directly to the trunk. And you may see at some point both a light and a dark side of the trunk, and that dark side is actually those solar panels, while the light side is a radiator to help cool the spacecraft. And speaking of solar panels, you can see on your screen right now the solar panels that we will install on the International Space Station. Once the Dragon capsule reaches the ISS, it will be able to autonomously dock using its navigation sensors, centerline camera, and light detection and ranging or LiDAR equipment. And there you can see on your screen Dragon separating from the second stage. Well, that's going to do it for me here in Hawthorne. The next milestone coming up is the Dragon nose cone opening sequence, which protects the docking ring and navigational sensors. And I'll toss it over to Shaniqua in Houston to talk us through it. Shaniqua?
Thanks, Zach. Everything is still going well back here in Mission Control Houston. Right after Dragon separated, it began a series of automatic checkouts, including small firings of the Draco maneuvering thrusters. The next milestone is nose cone deploy. The nose cone protects that docking hardware and rendezvous and tracking elements on top of Dragon during ascent. The nose cone deploy uncovers the 4 forward bulkhead thrusters, which Dragon will use for its major burn maneuvers. And we do have confirmation that that nose cone deploy sequence has begun. Again, major burn maneuvers will be Dragon nose cone deploy uncovers those major hardware. It will also uncover Dragon eyes, that rendezvous and tracking hardware that allows Dragon to know where it is in space and how to find the space station. Once open, the nose cone will stay in that position until the very end of its mission, closing prior to re-entry to provide some of that additional protection to the same hardware during re-entry. It does take about 5 minutes for a nose cone to open. We are looking for 12 hooks, 2 sets of 6 that will open here. And once open, we will see the nose cone deploy. Again, that sequence has begun, and we'll be waiting to hear once all 12 hooks are open. And we will see movement of the nose cone as all 12 hooks open. After nose cone deploy, Cargo Dragon will be safely on its way to the International Space Station. If you're just joining us, NASA and SpaceX's 28th commercial resupply mission launched from Pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida at 10:47 a.m. Central Time, 11:47 a.m. Eastern Time, and is currently in orbit. We're standing by now for nose cone deploy. Dragon is filled with over 7,000 pounds of cargo and supplies, including a variety of science investigations, hardware, and fresh foods for the crew on station. Some of those fresh foods that will be delivered include apples, grapefruits, oranges, cherry tomatoes, and blueberries. Dragon will dock to the zenith or space-facing side of the Harmony module, just recently freed up by Dragon Freedom, which brought up the Axiom 2 crew. The Axiom 2 crew aboard the SpaceX Dragon Freedom spacecraft safely splashed down off the coast of Florida at 10:04 p.m. Central Time, 11:04 p.m. Eastern on May 30th, 2023. The crew's return officially concluded the second all-private astronaut mission to the International Space Station. Axiom 2 commander and retired NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson ended her 8-day mission with a new record of 675 days in space, the most of any American or woman. And while we're discussing records, NASA astronaut Frank Rubio will end his mission this fall, breaking a record of his own. Rubio will return to Earth aboard a Russian Soyuz spacecraft no earlier than September 27th, and in his stay aboard the orbiting laboratory, having logged a total of at least 371 days in orbit. That tour of duty will beat the previous record of 355 days set by NASA astronaut Mark Vande Hei in 2022. Joining Rubio on station are 6 other crew members living and working aboard the International Space Station. Expedition 69 also includes Dmitry Patelin from Roscosmos, Sultan Adiyati from the United Arab Emirates, Woody Hoberg and Stephen Bowen of NASA, Andrei Fedyaev and Commander Sergei Prokopyev of Roscosmos. All crew members are awake, and after enjoying a midday meal, some are headed to exercise, while others are headed to do some spacewalk procedure reviews. NASA astronauts Stephen Bowen and Woody Hoberg are prepping for a June 9th spacewalk to install one of 2 new rollout solar arrays on the space station's starboard side truss structure. This cargo resupply will bring up 2 new rollout solar arrays packed inside its unpressurized trunk.
Acquisition of signal. Goonheli.
And again, if you're just joining us, we are currently waiting on nose cone deploy of the CRS-28 cargo spacecraft. That sequence has begun just a few minutes ago, and it does take about 5 minutes for the nose cone to fully deploy. After confirmation of nose cone, that the nose cone has been deployed, we will have a special guest join me for a quick interview. He will talk a little more on what Dragon is bringing up and its benefits to the International Space Station. And back here in the International Space Station room, flight control room, while we are waiting for that nose cone to officially be fully deployed, we will have flight controllers that are monitoring the systems on station itself ahead of Dragon's arrival Tuesday morning. Again, once the nose cone is fully deployed, we will have Cargo Dragon on its way to the International Space Station. Once Dragon does cross that approach ellipsoid, which is that mythical sphere around the space station, flight controllers here in Mission Control Houston will begin joint operations with SpaceX teams in Hawthorne, California. Again, we will have NASA astronauts Frank Rubio and Woody Hoberg, who will be monitoring the approach and arrival of Dragon, with a planned docking time on Tuesday morning at 4:50 a.m. Central Time, 5:50 a.m. Eastern Time. Once Cargo Dragon is docked to the station, Rubio and Hoberg will begin hatch operations to open the hatches between the International Space Station and Cargo Dragon. And again, this is live mission operations of the CRS-28 resupply mission to the International Space Station. If you are just joining us, we are currently waiting on the nose cone deployment of the vehicle. And we currently see that nose cone currently opening. And we have confirmation of nose cone deploy. And there we have it. We have nose cone confirmation of deployment. And now joining me on the phone is manager of the International Space Station Transportation and Integration Office, Phil Dempsey. Hi, Phil.
Hey, Shaniqua.
Thanks for joining me. And as we get into it, can you outline the major activities for the crew with CRS-28? I know we talked some of what's being brought up, but can you go a little more in depth for us?
Sure. During this mission, there's quite a bit of research that has to be done. So the crew will start, unloading the Cargo Dragon. There'll be actually quite a bit of research that's done in time to complete it and return those samples to the ground at the end of this dock mission. As well as that, we're carrying up some IROSIS, external solar arrays that have to be installed with a couple of VVAs during this mission.
Of course, and these resupply missions, just like you mentioned, are delivering science, hardware, and other cargo to the station. I know one key delivery on CRS-28 includes a pair of ISS rollout solar arrays. Can you discuss what the plan is for these arrays and what the importance is for station?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you know, the ISS program is extending operations to 2030. The robustness of the vehicle has been one of the key factors in our ability to do so. One thing we've seen is expected degradation of solar array performance over time. So these IROSIS will enable us to get back to beginning of life power levels. With this pair on the SpaceX 28 mission, we'll have augmented 6 of our 8 power channels further enabling the ISS program to continue full research utilization without interruption. That's why we're here in the first place.
Thank you. And as always, I know it's a busy time aboard the International Space Station with cargo vehicles coming and going and multiple planned spacewalks. How complex will the next few months be for the station program and the global partnership?
Sure. Well, as always, there's a lot going on. First we have the spacewalks to install the IROSs, which I just mentioned. Those are actually some of the most complex that our crew performs. Not long after completing those, we're looking forward to the NG-19 cargo resupply mission later this summer, bring up more critical supplies and research. And then we're not too far away from the next crew rotation missions on both the SpaceX Dragon and the Soyuz spacecraft. So we're definitely looking at some complex choreography, but we've got extremely capable teams across the world making it all happen.
Thank you so much. And we again appreciate you for joining us today.
All right. Thank you, and have a great day. It's good to see a good launch today.
Perfect. Thanks, Phil. Join us again early Tuesday morning at 3:15 a.m. Central Time for live coverage of docking for CRS-28. Again, everything is on track on the International Space Station side, so that'll do it for us here in Mission Control Houston. Now back over to you, Kennedy. Jasmine?
Thank you, Shaniqua. Yet another beautiful launch from Florida's Space Coast. And that's going to wrap up our launch coverage of the 28th Commercial Resupply Services mission from NASA and SpaceX. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll leave you with a replay of today's launch. Until next time, go NASA, go SpaceX, and go CRS-28.
And cargo, including a new pair of solar arrays to boost power on the space station.
At T plus 40 seconds, Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from historic Launch Complex 39A in Florida. And we're now coming up on max Q.
And that's it. This is a scary time for a lot of people, not just in Alberta, but right across the country, including in the Atlantic, the North, and Quebec, too. I think of people like Catherine in Nova Scotia. Even though she's lost her home, she found time to get help to her friend who's also affected and didn't want to be alone to see what was left of her own place. When people lose their homes, they don't just lose a roof and their possessions. They lose a special place where they saw their children grow up, where they built a life for themselves. This is incredibly difficult and heartbreaking. Canadians will continue to be there for you and with you. In the last week, I've spoken with Mayor Savage of Halifax, Mayor Locke of Shelburne, and Premier Houston, as well as with Premier Smith and other local leaders. Il y a 2 jours, j'ai parlé avec le Premier ministre Legault de la
2 days ago, I spoke with Premier Legault about the wildfire situation in Quebec. I also talked with the mayor and Le Serre and the head of Luakshot, Matam, Mike McKenzie. We spoke about the situation on the ground. As you are aware, members of the armed forces have already been deployed to help. Several wildfires cannot be predicted, so it's important to listen to local authorities to make sure that everyone stays safe.
Government is here to help. So far, we've approved 3 requests for federal assistance in Alberta, in Nova Scotia, and in Quebec. This includes deploying Canadian Armed Forces members for things like personnel to aid in firefighting roles, airlift resources, and engineering support. Minister Blair will go into more detail about the status of this work in a moment on what we're doing to keep people safe right now. Year after year, with climate change, we're seeing more and more intense wildfires, and in places where they don't normally happen. That's why we've invested to train more community-based firefighters across the country. For example, we've worked with the Yukon First Nations Wildfire Partnership to train 130 wildland firefighters in Yukon and northern British Columbia. In Newfoundland and Labrador, we partnered with the Innu Nation to train community members. In Manitoba, in Ontario, and in many other places, our support allowed more firefighters to be trained. And last week, we announced that through the Wildfire Training Fund, we're supporting over 300 Indigenous firefighters and 125 Indigenous fire guardians to be hired and trained this season. À travers le Centre Interservice des Feux de Forêt.
Through the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center, we are collaborating with other countries to fight against the wildfires here and throughout the country. For example, in the past, we sent Canadian firefighters to support firefighters in other countries like the United States and Australia. And since we are facing very intensive fires here, we are receiving hundreds of firefighters from other countries to support us.
Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and France for the firefighters they've already sent and will continue to send over the coming days and weeks. And on top of that, we're engaging further with other international partners about more reinforcements over the coming weeks. Before I end, I know there's a lot of Canadians who are asking how they can help too. The federal government and the government of Alberta are coordinating a donation matching program with the Canadian Red Cross 2023 Alberta Fires Appeal. So every dollar donated will become $3 in support to those affected by wildfire in Alberta. And as announced last week, we will set up similar donation matching programs to help people in the Northwest Territories and in Nova Scotia. This is a difficult time for many Canadians. If you have friends or family members who are affected, it's important to continue being there for one another. I want to thank the volunteers, first responders, CAF members, and of course, the firefighters who are doing their work like the true professionals they are. I know that firefighters are often away from their family. I was talking with the CDS, the Chief of Defense Staff, about how some CAF members are personally affected by fires. Some have had their homes damaged, some have seen their families evacuated. But despite all of this, they continue to step up to help and protect others. Thank you. To all Canadians, let's continue supporting our firefighters by listening to local authorities. And across the board, whether it's with members of the armed forces, to Parks Canada resources, to firefighters and equipment, the Coast Guard, Health Canada, and the Service Canada support, which Minister Gould will speak about shortly, our government is standing up support to keep people safe today and for wildfire seasons to come. I'll now turn it over to Minister Blair. Merci tout le monde. Bill.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Bon après-midi tout le monde.